Welcome. Good evening. So, we're midway through the 22nd chapter, The Problem of Life in the Life Divine. That consciousness force is itself undivided as it is present in Satchidananda, is here represented in life in the manifestation of this triple universe, is expressed in very much a divided movement. There's a clashing of truths that occurs when the manifestation proceeds through mind into the involutionary state from which this universe begins, beginning from division, moving towards unity, beginning from inconscience, moving towards superconscience, rescuing oneness from fragmentation, rescuing Ananda from what is its opposite. And as we're stationed at a midpoint in this evolutionary process, our ignorance prevents us from knowing ourselves fundamentally, from knowing others. We must outgrow this current status of things for the cosmos to gain its consummation. So the poise of life is determined at each level by how consciousness meets force. Because consciousness force at one in Satchidananda here appear divided. So there are four statuses, as we've seen, as Sri Aurobindo has described them: the material, the vital, the mental, and a fourth status when we achieve the supramental consciousness. So how consciousness and force relate to each other is the theme of the chapter and the nature of the four statuses that he's described to this point. So we begin from there, we pick it up from there with the chapter, with the paragraph that starts. From the data we have now before us, we can see that the difficulties which arise from the imperfect poise of consciousness and force in man in his present status of mind and life are principally three. First, he is aware only of a small part of his own being. His surface mentality, his surface life, his surface physical being is all that he knows, and he does not know even all of that. Below is the occult surge of his subconscious and his subliminal mind, his subconscious and his subliminal life impulses, his subconscious corporeality, all that large part of himself which he does not know and cannot govern, but which rather knows and governs him. Now, Sri Aurobindo has rewritten in part this section. He had written originally, below is the huge surge of his subconscious mind. Now he's changed huge to occult. And occult not in the spooky sense, the magical, mysterious sense, but more in the sense that it is hidden. That's what occult means. It means hidden. Occulere, to hide what is shielded from our perspective, what is veiled over. Also, he's inserted the term subliminal in several places, almost in apposition to subconscious. Really, he wants to distinguish them. Subconscious and subliminal should not be paired as being the same thing. He's using them to describe what is below our line of consciousness, the subconscious, and what is behind our line of consciousness, Now, subliminal may mean literally below the line of consciousness, but he's using it here to refer to a different kind of geography, not which is beneath us, and we're not aware of all the motivations and the sensations that continue to exist there. Rather, what exists behind, undetected, of which this superficial surface mentality, surface life, are the obvious play, but they don't define all of what is in our life and all that is in our mind. Nor does the subconscious define that. There are luminous areas of our being behind our direct attention. And so he's inserted this term here, even if he has not fully defined it, and he will later. He wants it to become useful to us here as he recasts and improves upon the original writing of the Life Divine. But it is interesting, all that large part, he added that also, all that large part of himself which he does not know and cannot govern, but which rather knows and governs him. So what is subconscious, what is behind, is far more determinative of what we're doing than what we directly intend to achieve. We think we're masters of our own destiny. And we are very much mastered by the forces rather than we wield them. So, to continue, and yet, the two being one movement, and not two separate movements, the larger and more potent part of ourselves must govern and determine in the mass the smaller and less powerful. Therefore, we are governed by the subconscious and subliminal, even in our conscious existence, and in our very self-mastery and self-direction. We are only instruments of what seems to us the inconscient within us. Inconscient also is not fully defined and won't for some chapters yet. But clearly the implication is that this is something that's not merely subconscious, but lapses into a greater field. And since he's capitalized it, he gives it rather a cosmic dimension. It is important for the whole explanation of the world that something be inconscient, be not simply unconscious, but lapse into what seems to be a final grade without any awareness. Now, having carefully described that there is only Satchit Ananda, and even where there is apparent inconscience, there must be the full reality of conscious being present, even if not thrown to our centerpiece awareness. This is not something that is common to our experience, and yet it is a truth which is apprehendable to a growing experience. So this is a prod for us to grow more. For example, we can't trace our normal motivations because these larger areas of us are really governing us. We're aware of what the conscious mind is told to say by regions and dimensions of us which are really fashioning our intent. We're aware only of what we're aware. To become all aware is necessary to the questing human spirit. But back to the nature of nature. This is what the old wisdom meant when it said that man imagines himself. Pardon, let me start again. This is what the old wisdom meant when it said that man imagines himself to be the doer of the work by his free will. But in reality, nature determines all his works, and even the wise are compelled to follow their own nature. This is true in the whole teaching of the Sankhya from almost the beginning of Indian thought, straight through the Vedanta and the Bhagavad Gita. But, Sri Aurobindo writes, since nature is the creative force of consciousness of the being within us, who is masked by his own inverse movement and apparent denial of himself. They called that inverse creative movement of his consciousness the Maya or illusion power of the Lord, and said that all existences are turned as upon a machine through his Maya by the Lord seated within the heart of all existences. This goes back to one of the opening citations or mottos to this chapter, the citation from the Bhagavad Gita in the last chapter, the 61st verse. It is evident, he writes, then, that only by man so far exceeding mind as to become one in self-awareness with the Lord can he become master of his own being. He's made this point similarly in earlier passages. It is only when we recover the full definition of ourself, when we unify our being with the Supreme, that we can, in a sense, wield that sort of sovereignty which allows us to become master of self. Because that unity alone can achieve it. If we live in a divided consciousness, how can we unify our being? If our consciousness is divided, then necessarily the force operative within us is divided. And how can a force separated each facet from the other achieve unification? So for us to grow back to that stance of unity is all the challenge. And he continues, and since this is not possible in the inconscience or in the subconscious itself, since profit cannot come by plunging down into our depths back towards the inconscient, it can only be by going inward where the Lord is seated, and by ascending into that which is still superconscient to us, into the supermind, that this unity can be wholly established. Now it's important to note that he inserted this phrase, by going inward where the Lord is seated, into his original writing. At first, he demanded only the ascent upwards. But it is, of course, not simply a geographical location. If one goes into the center of one's being and discovers the secret soul there, unites with it, then at the center of that soul stands that Lord who is turning all beings as if mounted upon a machine, as it is necessary to do as long as all beings live in the inconscient. When they become fully aware of their nature again, then the Lord is revealed as sovereign of all, as sovereign within you. You are not absent. You are not looking for direction outside, because it is there within you. So he has said that a solution may come by either an inward movement or an upward movement. Penetrating, ascending. For there is the higher and divine, for there, in the higher and divine Maya, is the conscious knowledge, in its law and truth, of that which works in the subconscious by the lower Maya, under the conditions of the denial which seeks to become the affirmation. So this recalls earlier chapters where Sri Aurobindo described how in the expression of Satchitananda, mind is not its first determinant. It is supermind. And supermind brings the infinite into a concerted harmony as a manifesting reality. And that supermind could be described as a higher Maya, that which measures out from the infinite, the finite, constellates the cosmos. And what it constellates is true and reverberates with truth and harmony and oneness throughout. But it continues on. And here in the subconscious, even though through the dividing action of the mind, we have arrived at this apparent disunity, there is this secret in this lower Maya of the higher Maya's will working, which carries it forward. So if this seems to be a denial of what is present and full in Satchit Ananda, expressed in Supermind, it is a limited perspective and works towards the recapturing of it, which you could say is an affirmation. The cosmos seems to deny that unity, but works towards the affirmation of that unity. And he says, in fact, in this next sentence, for this lower nature works out what is willed and known in that higher nature. So do not despair. What is willed in the supramental, even though the face of its luster is covered here in the apparent darkness of this triplicity of ignorance, is moving ineluctably towards an already seen and established goal. It cannot fail to achieve it. Its will is securely placed in the length and the breadth of the cosmic endeavor. The illusion power, he writes, of the divine knowledge in the world which creates appearances is governed by the truth power of the same knowledge which knows the truth behind the appearances and keeps ready for us the affirmation towards which they are working. The partial and apparent man here will find there the perfect and real man, capable of an entirely self-aware being by his full unity with that self-existent who is the omniscient Lord of his own cosmic evolution and procession. Always present, the Supreme. And again, let's just recall, since it's been a week or so since we've touched upon it, when Sri Aurobindo uses man, he means it to represent all of humanity using that old license in literature. And we no longer would use gender-biased terms like that, but it's there. Let's deal with it and get beyond it to the unity which Sri Aurobindo describes. So this is that first difficulty, this superficiality of our self-awareness. Now we come to the second. And the second difficulty is that man is separated in his mind, his life, his body from the universal. And therefore, even as he does not know himself, is equally and even more incapable of knowing his fellow creatures. He forms by inferences, theories, observations, and a certain imperfect capacity of sympathy, a rough mental construction about them. But this is not knowledge. Knowledge can only come by conscious identity, for that is the only true knowledge, existence aware of itself. This is the nature of the supramental as it expresses the infinity of Satchit Ananda. And this is a fundamental principle of epistemology for Sri Aurobindo, that knowledge is gained through identity. Knowledge through indirection may be a kind of formative movement towards knowledge, but will always be baked in ignorance. We must free it from that shell by restoring it to the fullness of a unified awareness by identity. Conscious identity. We know, he writes, what we are so far as we are consciously aware of ourself. The rest is hidden. So also we can come really to know that which we become. I'll have to start again. So also we can come really to know that with which we become one in our consciousness, but only so far as we can become one with it. If the means of knowledge are indirect and imperfect, the knowledge attained will also be indirect and imperfect. It will enable us to work out with a certain precarious clumsiness, but still perfectly enough from our mental standpoint, certain limited practical aims, necessities, conveniences, a certain imperfect and insecure harmony of our relations with that which we know. But only by a conscious unity with it can we arrive at a perfect relation. Therefore, we must arrive at a conscious unity with our fellow beings, and not merely at the sympathy created by love or the understanding created by mental knowledge, which will always be the knowledge of their superficial existence, and therefore imperfect in itself and subject to denial and frustration by the uprush of the unknown and unmastered from the subconscient or the subliminal in them and us. But this conscious oneness can only be established by entering into that in which we are one with them, the universal. And the fullness of the universal exists consciently only in that which is superconscient to us, in the supermind. For here, in our normal being, the greater part of it is subconscient, and therefore in this normal poise of mind, life, and body, it cannot be possessed. The lower conscious nature is bound down to ego in all its activities, chained triply to the stake of differentiated individuality. The supermind alone commands unity in diversity. So we cannot contextualize our knowledge with all, because we begin from this divided awareness. And so long as that division distinguishes us, we cannot, in a sense, reach out and be with another. We can sense, to some extent, what they feel and go through. But this is all the problem of intersubjectivity. We guess we know what another feels. We guess we know what they know. But we can't really know because our consciousness doesn't really identify with it. It's in sympathy with it. We can have a working knowledge of what is going on, but it's filled with lots of guesswork. So to be able to identify ourselves with another means that we have to have that faculty of awareness which climbs beyond the arc of mind and arrives in the supramental. So you can see that everything that we examine so far demands from the cosmic side that its solution sought for pushes us beyond what we have currently achieved. We must continue to grow. This implies that our division in being and consciousness and force can only be healed if we regain unity of being. We must become welded in oneness. We must see only one reality. We must see only one conscious force working everywhere. We must recognize that all others are ourselves, and ourselves are in others. And all express the reality, the sublimity of that Lord who is stationed within. The third difficulty is the division between force and consciousness in the evolutionary existence. There is first the division which has been created by the evolution itself in its three successive formations of matter, life, and mind each with its own law of working. So this is section A in this third difficulty. The life is at war with the body. It attempts to force it to satisfy life's desires, impulses, satisfactions, and demands from its limited capacity, what could only be possible to an immortal and divine body. A little more than the body can submit to. And the body, enslaved and tyrannized over, suffers and is in constant dumb revolt against the demands made upon it by the life. The mind is at war with both. Sometimes it helps the life against the body, sometimes restrains the vital urge and seeks to protect the corporeal frame from life's desires, passions, and overdriving energies. It also seeks to possess the life and turn its energy to the mind's own ends, to the utmost joys of the mind's own activity, to the satisfaction of mental, aesthetic, emotional aims and their fulfillment in human existence. And the life, too, finds itself enslaved and misused, and is in frequent insurrection against the ignorant, half-wise tyrant seated above it. So this is a rather jarring concert, seeking for harmony. But it is a general description, you know, of what we know in our typical psychology, isn't it? He may be funny, but he's also accurate. This is the war of our members, which the mind cannot satisfactorily resolve, because it has to deal with a problem insoluble to it, the aspiration of an immortal being in a mortal life and body. So all these things have legitimate aims. Life is trying to achieve a great goal. It finds the body unwilling. Mind is trying to referee sometimes and pull life back, but it has its own goals, and it finds the body incapable and the life sometimes indomitable. And the body knows in its own way what it can achieve, but it cannot be left alone long enough by either of these partners to achieve full strength and plasticity. So, how do we arrive at this resolution? It can only arrive at it. It can only arrive at a long succession of compromises, or end in an abandonment of the problem, either by submission with the materialist to the mortality of our apparent being, or with the ascetic and the religionist by the rejection and condemnation of the earthly life and withdrawal to happier and easier fields of existence. But the true solution lies in finding the principle beyond mind, of which immortality is the law, and in conquering by it the mortality of our existence. So it will be by an ascent and consequent descent that we can find the solution in the here and now. That means going to the future to solve the present crisis, because it is the future attainment that will bring us here. Aspiration is key. But there is also that fundamental division within, between force of nature and the conscious being, which is the original cause of this incapacity. Division within. Not only is there a division between the mental, the vital, and the physical being, but each of them is also divided against itself. The capacity of the body is less than the capacity of the instinctive soul or conscious being, the physical Purusha within it. The capacity of the vital force less than the capacity of the impulsive soul, the vital conscious being or Purusha within it. The capacity of the mental energy less than the capacity of the intellectual and emotional soul, the mental Purusha within it. So far we've seen that the term Purusha refers to the real person inside of us, no? So, simply put, there would be a Purusha dealing with various activities of Prakriti, one Purusha. But Sri Aurobindo now begins to introduce a concept of the Purusha stationed in governance at each of the levels of manifest nature. So a physical Purusha, a vital Purusha, and a mental Purusha. The physical, Annamaya Purusha, the vital, Pranamaya Purusha, and the mental, Manomaya Purusha. Deeply behind all is that representation of our central truth, the psychic, what Sri Aurobindo will define as the Chaitya, the conscious Purusha, which governs the Purusha stationed at these various levels. So I understand this is a somewhat complex geography of the conscious territory of our nature, but we'll get used to using this terminology after it has been properly introduced. Here Sri Aurobindo is suggesting it. So there's a Purusha behind Prakriti at each level. And I think we can continue now. For the soul is the inner consciousness which aspires to its own complete self-realization and therefore always exceeds the individual formation of the moment. And the force which has taken its poise in the formation is always pushed by its soul to that which is abnormal to the poise, transcendent of it. Thus, constantly pushed, it has much trouble in answering, more in evolving from the present to a greater capacity. So this is why we are never satisfied, because there is something immortal in us, the nature of our soul, at one with the Supreme, we could say, that demands us always to exceed what we have done to this point. We must always be restless until we have transcended, exceeded all that we have so far built. We smash the house and rebuild it. We smash that one and rebuild that. Just as we live one life, finish it, and move to another, we're always coming back, reiterating, reestablishing, questing forward towards what seems to be an unreachable goal. It has been unreachable to this point because we've been working with a divided being, but as we evolve farther and farther, or further and further, we will achieve governance of the supramental, and therein find the unification that all our being demands, satisfying the body, satisfying the life, satisfying the mind, because a greater reality has taken control of all these instruments. In trying to fulfill the demands of this triple soul, it is distracted and driven to set instinct against instinct, impulse against impulse, emotion against emotion, idea against idea, satisfying this, denying that, then repenting and returning on what it has done, adjusting, compensating, readjusting ad infinitum, but not arriving at any principle of unity. We're searching for it, and we're seeing the justice in each note sounded in the universal symphony. But none of those notes stand unified yet in the overarching harmony of the supramental. And in the mind, he writes, again, the conscious power that should harmonize and unite is not only limited in its knowledge and in its will, but the knowledge and the will are disparate and often at discord. The principle of unity is above in the supermind, but there alone is the conscious unity of all diversities. There alone will and knowledge are equal and in perfect harmony. There alone consciousness and force arrive at their divine equation. So you can see all these things start moving back. Consciousness and force divided here, establishing the various limited relationships available to us in the worlds, the planes of matter, life, and mind. As they reach the supramental level, converge into unity again. There is the source of the harmony that we see. So we're always moving upwards. And it's only when we achieve the supramental status that we, in a sense, live in the spontaneous harmony of that reality of Satchitananda. Satchitananda makes itself real through the supramental, through its harmonious law, and we are going to reestablish that through the powers of evolution and unify what seems to be the disparate parts of our nature. Man, in proportion as he develops into a self-conscious and truly thinking being, becomes acutely aware of all this discord and disparateness in his parts, and he seeks to arrive at a harmony of his mind, life, and body, a harmony of his knowledge and will and emotion, a harmony of all his members. Sometimes this desire stops short at the attainment of a workable compromise which will bring with it a relative peace. But compromise can only be a halt on the way, since the deity within will not be satisfied eventually with less than a perfect harmony combining in itself the integral development of our many-sided potentialities. So it's God inside us that refuses to be long satisfied with something that seems to be good enough for the moment. It eventually shakes it off and says, no. Onwards. Less than this would be an evasion of the problem, not its solution, or else only a temporary solution provided as a resting place for the soul in its continual self-enlargement and ascension. Such a perfect harmony would demand as essential terms a perfect mentality, a perfect play of vital force, a perfect physical existence. But where, in the radically imperfect, shall we find the principle and power of perfection? Mind, rooted in division and limitation, cannot provide it to us, nor can life and the body, which are the energy and the frame of dividing and limiting mind. The principle and power of perfection are there in the subconscient, but wrapped up in the tegument or veil of the lower maya, a mute premonition emerging as an unrealized ideal. In the superconscient, they await, open, eternally realized, but still separated from us by the veil of our self-ignorance. So, in the subconscient, this oceanic reality of which we are unaware because it's below our line of mental knowledge, is this same reality. This push to perfection is there, operating within it. We don't perceive it at the mental level. This push to perfection is already achieved, self-realized in the supramental. So in the superconscient and in the subconscient, these things are operative. Here it seems to be dicey. Here we're unconvinced that it's going to happen. that this kind of perfection is attainable, achievable to us. But it's separated from our view by this veil of self-ignorance. If we remove that and come to full knowledge of what we are again, it means that we have ascended back to that supramental station of being. It is above then, and not either in our present poise nor below it, that we must seek for the reconciling power and knowledge. Remember, we've already blocked off that we can't go back to the superconscient for it. We can't go back to the subconscient to arrive at a superconscient solution. We can only go forward and grow, as we have so far, from the subconscient into the conscient and next into the superconscient. The penultimate paragraph. Equally, man, as he develops, becomes acutely aware of the discord and ignorance that governs his relations with the world, acutely intolerant of it, more and more set upon finding a principle of harmony, peace, joy, and unity. So we're moving here from the personal to the social dimension, and we're moving from personal knowledge and transformation to a possible social transformation or an illumination of the cosmos in its entirety. This too can only come to him from above. For only by developing a mind which shall have knowledge of the mind of others as of itself, free from our mutual ignorance and misunderstanding, a will that feels and makes itself one with the will of others, an emotional heart that contains the emotions of others as its own, a life force that senses the energies of others and accepts them for its own, and seeks to fulfill them as its own, and a body that is not a wall of imprisonment and defense against the world, but all this under the law of a light and truth that shall transcend the aberrations and errors, the much sin and falsehood of our and others' minds, wills, emotions, life energies. Only so can the life of man spiritually and practically become one with that of his fellow beings, and the individual recover his own universal self. The subconscient has this life of the all, and the superconscient has it, but under conditions which necessitate our motion upwards. For not towards the Godhead concealed in the inconscient ocean where darkness is wrapped within darkness, but towards the Godhead seated in the sea of eternal light, in the highest ether of our being, is the original impetus which has carried upward the evolving soul to the type of our humanity. So if we look at those footnotes, we see the very familiar 129th hymn from the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, saying that is not where we're going, not towards the darkness, but towards the waters, and here we quote, which are in the realm of light above the sun, and those which abide below. You could even insert there the verb, the waters come here, which are in the realm of light above the sun, and those which abide below. In other words, the truths all converge here, in this place. We're going to call that down, and it will become true here. What is true subconsciously will rise into full conscience, just as what is superconscient to us will descend and become conscient. All must be wedded together. And so this is to Sri Aurobindo a more appropriate image, and why he invokes it. In the Arya, this second citation is not there. He didn't place it. He has made sure that he went back to find it this time. And I don't know who found this citation for him. There were times when Sri Aurobindo was looking for support from the Rig Veda, and he would send for the best scholars with him in Pondicherry, Kapali Shastriya or Purani, and asked them for help. And often if Purani couldn't find it, Sri Aurobindo would suggest, call upon Kapali, see if he can find it. And Kapali would find and bring the very citation he was looking for. Purani worked hard to gain acquaintanceship with the Rig Veda, but Kapali was the Rig Veda. Now to the last paragraph, the ultimate paragraph. Unless, therefore, the race is to fall by the wayside and leave the victory to other and new creations of the eager, travailing mother, it must aspire to this ascent, conducted indeed through love, mental illumination, and the vital urge to possession and self-giving, but leading beyond to the supramental unity which transcends and fulfills them. In the founding of human life upon the supramental realization of conscious unity with the One and with all in our being and in all its members, humanity must seek its final good and salvation. And this is what we have described as the fourth status of life in its ascent towards the Godhead. I think we all read the Life Divine and attempt to understand it in its comprehensive picture of an evolving cosmos. But there are also insights that we gain from it and apply individually and personally in our lives. And our lives are embedded in larger contexts. We live in groups, we live in families. And we have, with the dynamic push of our own aspiration, an effect upon the collectivity in which we live. It may be unseen, it may be unsensed in the main, but always a fire has been lit. Agni has been ignited, that psychic flame pushing for greater harmony, for larger truth, for persistent growth is there, present. So the study of the Life Divine can have that impact. I say this to bring a practical note into the picture tonight, because one of our friends who is participating in this study with us described for me how her teen had an interest in obtaining something. And in fashioning an argument to justify why this thing should be given, she brought her mind to a focused point, and in figuring her argument, also recognized that there was a possibility that she would not get the thing that she wanted, and was prepared both to make the argument and to be content within, even if it was denied. But when she presented the request to her father with appropriate argument, instead of encountering resistance, he immediately said yes. So it's wonderful, isn't it? This tapasya that preceded the presentation resulted in the acquisition of the thing. But that's not what is wonderful about it. What is wonderful about it was her reaction, was one of a spontaneous joy. Not joy in the thing that she had sought. It was the inner value of the moment which was meaningful to her, not exultation in getting the object of her quest. And that is a lesson. The tapasya that prepares us for the attainment, the spontaneous happiness of the vital when it attains, but also the ever-present, ebullient joy of the soul, which gels all. That is the thing which emerged in that. That is the inexplicable element. Not the satisfaction of desire, but the joy, the equality, regardless of what happens, I will be happy, and then the recognition of that happiness. This is self-discovery in motion. This probably happens in your life, but let's call attention to it when it does, recognize it, because there is a culture of consciousness, and we each lean into the other. That linked union of life is always present, and that calls me to Savitri. I think we'll continue with the passage that we had started last time. This is in the second book, the book of the Traveler of the Worlds. We're in the second canto, the Kingdom of Subtle Matter. A vast unknown is round us and within. All things are wrapped in the dynamic one. A subtle link of union joins all life. Thus all creation is a single chain. We are not left alone in a closed scheme between a driving of inconscient force and an incommunicable absolute. Our life is a spur in a sublime soul range. Our being looks beyond its walls of mind, and it communicates with greater worlds. There are brighter earths and wider heavens than ours. There are realms where being broods in its own depths. It feels in its immense dynamic core its nameless, unformed, unborn potencies cry for expression in the unshaped vast. Ineffable beyond ignorance and death, the images of its everlasting truth look out from a chamber of its self-wrapped soul. As if to its own inner witness gaze, the spirit holds up its mirrored self and works, the power and passion of its timeless heart, the figures of its formless ecstasy, the grandeurs of its multitudinous might. Thence comes the mystic substance of our souls into the prodigy of our nature's birth. There is the unfallen height of all we are, and dateless fount of all we hope to be. On every plane the hieratic power, initiate of unspoken verities, dreams to transcribe and make a part of life in its own native style and living tongue, some trait of the perfection of the unborn, some vision seen in the omniscient light, some far tone of the immortal rhapsodist voice, some rapture of the all-creating bliss, some form and plan of the beauty unutterable. I hope it has not seemed like a long evening. It's been a pleasure to be with you again. Jai Ma, namaste, until next week.